It's been a minute. Now, when you last saw me, I was in the worst reading slump I have ever been in. I need to take a little content break and like just try and find a book I was enjoying reading again. I can tell you this, I have read some books I really enjoyed reading, but for the most part, I've been having a hard time. Because I think that there's some incredible books in here, but I personally am still having a hard time. However, I am ready to read fantasy again. I've been having that itch, which is good. Fantasy is my favorite genre. Anyways, let's get into it. I read Duskman, which is the second book in the Esprithian series. The first book, Riftborn, was a little bit difficult for me. However, you have to get through Riftborn to read Duskbound. This is fantastic. And then after that, I read book 1 and 2 in the Compelling Fate Saga. They're completely different books, but there was like too many similarities between these two in terms of like how they're set up, where it was difficult for me to read this series. And then the third book wasn't on audio yet, so I am taking a pause from this. I do want to pick this back up at some point, but not anytime soon, at least not until all the audio is out. And I did think that this was just a really enjoyable experience, so anything to follow up after this was quite difficult. Next, we have Night Road by Kristen Hanna. Yes. And then I read My Friends by Frederick Backman. Now look, I was trying to read books outside of my comfort zone to really try and get out of my reading slump. I liked this book, but I didn't love it the way that other people did, so I'm gonna say maybe. And then I read The Compound by Ailing Rahl. I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly. Here's the thing with this book. This book has all the elements to be an amazing book. Honestly, the first half of this book, I was eating it up. I was like, this is going to be a great time. I cannot wait to see where this goes. It felt like there was things that were missing. It felt like they needed to up the ante more. I almost wish this book was like rewritten because I think that this book could be amazing. I would still say yes to this though. And then I read Dawn and Ruins by Magda Mizzi. I really enjoyed it. It is very much like if The Last of Us was young adult. Then I read Wild Dark Shore. I know that this book is so loved by people, and as I was reading it, even after I finished it, I can tell why people really, really love this book. And I am going to attribute this to my reading slump. I didn't understand the hype personally, but I can see why people like it. I don't know how else to explain it. I would still recommend this though. And then I read Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Yes. Absolutely yes. I love this book. I read The First Witch of Boston. One personal gripe I had with it, if I were you, I would not read the prologue. I would read the prologue last. But other than that, this book is an absolute yes. And then I read The Stolen Queen by Fiona Davis. If you are someone who's a history buff who has a huge interest in Egypt and the pyramids and the King's Valley and the tombs, this is a very good book for you. She was able to weave in so much historical information, especially about museums today and how things are moved around. I loved it for that fact. However, the emotional story she was writing throughout this, I didn't like how it ended, but overall I would still recommend. And then I read The Secret Book Society. I unfortunately DNF'd this. I think this is a really good book, but I had just read so many historical fictions in a row, as you just saw, and I kind of was burnt out. I do want to try and pick this up again sometime though. And I read Together We Rise by Richie Billing. This book is so short and it packs such a punch. Here's the thing, I don't love multiple POVs, especially in shorter books, because it makes it harder for me to connect with the characters. He does such a good job writing this. This is kind of like if Game of Thrones was a little novella. I pictured King's Landing, like the citizens of King's Landing in this. I read Not Quite Dead Yet by Holly Jackson. I'm gonna say no. And then I read The Widow by John Grisham. I'm gonna have to say no. And then I read Beautiful Ugly by Alice Finney. No for me. I know a lot of people really liked this, but it didn't really feel thrilling. Like it's a thriller for sure, but it didn't thrill me. But anyways, these are the books that I've read.